So I've been getting some pretty big mixed responses on these Starfield videos. Some of the instances, everyone loves the video. Other instances, everyone seems to hate the video. And then some of the videos are a mix of in between. Some people like it, some people dislike it. I don't really know. Either way, we get some more information or potential leaks on Starfield. Not entirely sure as to what I'm going to name this video just yet, but it may be something around the idea that I think one of these leaks is actually pretty true and the other one is pretty fake. I'm going to cover both of them either way. One of them has way more content than the other. Can you guess which? But before we jump to that, I actually do want to shout out my Discord yet again. I started a Discord since not all of YouTube's notifications are getting sent to the sub boxes and people aren't always getting notified when I upload a video. So I made a Discord server that I just post my videos in for right now. In the future, there may be a chat function, but right now it's literally just one chat with me posting my videos. In addition, in about 4 days time, I'm going to be picking someone on that Discord channel to win $50 over PayPal, over Steam, over Xbox Live credit, whatever it may be. There's a link to that down below, but otherwise, let's go into these two leaks. I guess first and foremost, let's go into the one that I think has a lot more credibility and actually may be a true leak. But at the same time, I've covered leaks in the past that I thought were true at the time and turned out to be very, very fake. So take everything in this video, even the one I think is more true, with a grain of salt. I will have links to everything I'm showing you down below, so if you're skeptical or want to look more into it, I definitely recommend checking out the original sources, not just taking my word for it. Either way, if you're just clicking on this video randomly, Starfield is rumored to be the next AAA RPG from Bethesda Game Studios. There's a trademark filed for it a long time ago, as well as Bethesda themselves have mentioned they're going to start working on some new IPs, not a new Fallout or the Elder Scrolls game just yet, and many expect this new game to get announced at this E3 in June and actually get released for everyone to play in November. So the first leak is actually super minor. It's on this website called ResetEra. I honestly hadn't heard about it until yesterday, but it seems like a pretty reputable website. In order to even sign up for it, you have to have a paid email domain. So you can't just use your Hotmail or Gmail email. You have to have either a student one or an Opt Online, Verizon one, or if you own your own website, you could have one that way, somewhere where there's a pay gate for you to actually sign up for that email. And all around, just reading online a bit, it seems like it has somewhat of a reputation for being reputable, that this website is way more no nonsense when compared to some of the other ones out there. So there's a post made on one of their subforums that did say, speculation, I believe Starfield ZeniMax/Bethesda is a mobile game. And he provides some of the evidence as to why he thinks that's going to be a mobile game. Oddly enough, that's actually not the leak. The leak is coming from someone who responded to this. There's a lot of plausibility behind this. Obviously, ZeniMax has been renewing the trademark for Starfield, so it's probably some type of game, maybe not Bethesda's next game. And Bethesda Game Studios themselves have talked about how they always plan on working on new mobile games going forward since Fallout Shelter had so much success. So connecting those two dots isn't that crazy. But obviously one of the responders disagreed here, and what he said was, no it's not, smiley face, and it's coming this fall, so just wait for E3. So in most websites, whether it be YouTube comments, Reddit, or some of the other cesspools of the internet, this would just get downvoted into oblivion. But it seems like on this website in particular, people are maybe a little bit more logical and actually asked them, do you have any proof? Do you actually have insider knowledge? And this guy responded to them saying, yeah, I do, and I don't know how I'd verify that. But to make a long story short, more or less an admin reached out to him and later made a post saying that at this time, administrators cannot verify the contents of the quoted post made by Potterson in this thread are accurate. However, the user has shared information with us that suggests they could be in a position to know the information they claim in the post. As always, ResetEra members take full responsibility for what they post. So that's kind of the reason I gave that information earlier as to why this seemingly is a more reputable place on the internet. I actually reached out to that same poster myself and more or less said, hey, could you share anything with me confidentially? I do plan on making a video about this topic, and he said that he's not going to give me the same thing he sent those admins, but more or less it was relating to his place of work. So he probably provided the administrator with maybe his own ID or a picture of him with his job ID, something like that, to verify that he worked at some place that maybe would have some insider knowledge. I think this is really interesting, and for a number of reasons. Now maybe I'm just simply looking too deep into this, but I think it's interesting because this guy doesn't really want to delve into any of the details. All he actually did was correct someone who was, according to him, incorrectly claiming that Starfield was going to be a mobile game. He doesn't necessarily confirm it's going to be the next AAA RPG from Bethesda Game Studios, just that it's coming at the C3 and it's not a mobile game. That makes it pretty likely that it is still going to be a AAA game, maybe from Bethesda Game Studios or maybe from one of ZeniMax's other studios, but obviously people are going to view this as it's more or less confirmed it's Bethesda Game Studios' next game. I'm still not convinced. And again, I feel like some of the other aspects about this seem a little bit more plausible. He responded to me in my private message. He still has an active post history. It's not like he just posted posted this on this account and abandoned it forever. And also, he's not sharing so many details. He just corrected someone. It's not like he's writing this long post trying to get a ton of attention. Again, maybe I am just looking way too deep into it, but I think this one actually could be fairly plausible. So now let's get into the one that is probably fake, but actually has way more details. So this one comes from a Reddit post on the Bethesda Softworks subreddit. He introduces himself as saying he has a source and everything that he's saying is going to be confirmed this May, and that Bethesda Game Studios is in fact working on a new game called Starfield that is going to be a sci-fi based game. He mentions how a lot of other sci-fi games have been coming out, they think the market's trending that way, and Todd Howard has actually wanted to make a sci-fi game. There is some evidence to back that up. Obviously, Todd Howard wanted to make a Star Trek game, and then Obsidian was working on a sci-fi game, and then there was another one called 10th Planet. I've talked about those more in depth in other videos, so if you haven't seen it, I'll have a link to that video at the end of this one. But at the same time, this apparent leaker would have been able to read all of those, and if he wants to make his leak pretty seemingly genuine, he probably would use pieces of evidence like that to back up his potentially false claims. He goes on to say the setting's more of a space fantasy, more akin to Star Wars, and having fantasy themes transfer over from some of their other works, so probably the Elder Scrolls or Fallout. He also mentions how you can make your own character like in Fallout 4, and there's going to be a settlement system on some of the different planets so you can make mini colonies, and that combat also is going to be pretty similar to Fallout 4's, but he actually mentions that it's going to have a better cover mechanic, and somewhere else he mentions that the animations aren't going to be as janky in Fallout 4, and he says it's going to be a skill that allows you to climb buildings and terrain. This is pretty interesting because in an interview in the past, Todd Howard did mention that they're finishing up a game using the old animation system, and their newer games are moving on to a newer animation system. Obviously that's somewhat vague, but this leak apparently suggests that a newer animation system is being implemented, or at least improvements on the old one. Then he mentions how you could start on one of 4 planets. You actually get to choose which planet to start on, and they're going to have their own themes, and one of them is going to have a city, but then you actually can travel from system to system, and there's going to be this thing called an unknown region with procedurally generated planets and aliens and things like that. This procedural generation is actually something Bethesda has toyed with some of their previous Elder Scrolls games specifically, and even like the Radiant Quest system is somewhat similar to that, so it definitely seems plausible that that could be in the next game. Building even further off of that, he actually mentions that it's going to contain infinite weapons similar to how it worked in Borderlands. If you don't know, in Borderlands there was something like 1.1 different weapon combinations, and it was all generated by a computer with a few base parts. He also mentions how this is actually going to have vehicles in it. There's going to be different ships that you can buy, ranging from kind of a normal spaceship size, like a cruiser, to actually something quite large. In addition, there's actually going to be land vehicles also to explore these procedurally generated planets. And he also mentions one thing that's kind of unique, that if you go and actually document all the aspects of one of these alien species, which may or may not be procedurally generated, it can be a procedurally generated species, and then bring that back to the starting area that has those 4 non-procedurally generated planets, you'll actually unlock that as a playable character or species when you start a new playthrough. I thought that was pretty interesting, but otherwise, again, I would take everything with a grain of salt. He mentions towards the end here that is going to be released, or the gameplay will be released in May, and then we'll get a full release at E3 in June. So that's only about a month and a half away when he hypothetically says we will see a gameplay trailer for this. That's somewhat similar to what they did with Fallout 4, so that also is plausible, but based on the history, it's something they've already done, so I take it with a grain of salt. Either way, that largely wraps it up for this video. Both of these leaks I would take with a grain of salt, but I think the first one is significantly more plausible than the second one. But at the same time, both of these could just be hoaxes, or someone with some pretty good Photoshop skills that could fake an ID to prove his place of work. And then the second one really doesn't even provide any verification. I actually reached out to him on Reddit, sent him a private message, and he never got back to me. And it's been about 24 hours. But of course, before we conclude this, I actually do want to share with you a psychology fun fact of the day, and today is going to be about the goal gradient effect. This is pretty interesting. It was actually studied in 1934, or at least that's when the original paper was published by Hull, and more or less what he found was as rats are running through a maze with food at the end, they'll actually run faster towards the end of the maze as they get closer to the food. The idea behind this being that you will accelerate your behavior as you progress closer to your goal. So I mean, that sounds kind of cool in theory. There's a few applications that you could think of right off the bat. Like if you're studying, you're probably going to study more and maybe devote more time to it as you're getting toward the end of your study session. Like you've been studying for 4 days and the test is tomorrow, you're probably going to devote more time on that final day because you're almost at the end. But something that I think is a bit more interesting and maybe a more real world application of this, you know what, like some of those chain restaurants or like coffee shops that you get a card and they'll kind of stamp out a little part of it every time you buy something, then eventually you get 1 coffee free. Well, some businesses will actually use this effect. So let's say I give you a card that has 6 slots on it, and when you get 6 stamps, you get 1 free coffee. People use that slightly slower than if I gave you a card with 8 slots on it, but I said, you know what, I'll stamp the first 2 for you because it's like a special. So it's still going to take 6 return visits to actually get that free coffee, but when you start off with 2 stamped off, the likelihood of you returning and actually getting those subsequent stamps goes up substantially. I found this to be really interesting. I think it's something cool, not super applicable to everyday life, but you can find a few instances of how this applies to you. Either way, that's pretty much going to wrap it up for this one. Again, as always, I thank you all for watching. I do hope you enjoyed, and I hope to see you all next time. Later.